Over to you, Chair. Thank you. Sorry.
Good evening to you. I'm Councillor Russell Ford-Smith, the chair of the advisory group, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting. This meeting is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings. Councillors are reminded that although this meeting is held remotely, they're regarded as being present in a meeting of the Council, and they should observe the normal rules of behaviour. First of all, could I ask everyone present to make sure that your microphones remain muted and your cameras turned off when you're not addressing the meeting, and this reduces background noise and avoids feedback and so on. Can members also ensure that their mobile phones are now switched off or on silent mode? Please, can I also advise that the meeting is being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website, and in addition, a video recording of the meeting will be uploaded to the Council's YouTube channel afterwards. Members and officers, where appropriate for each item, please use the chat function or raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak or to raise a point of order or explanation, and I will invite you then to speak at the appropriate time. Each member will be invited. Therefore, I would encourage all members to keep their contributions as clear and concise as possible, please. When speaking and referring to the agenda papers, please make sure you reference the page or paragraph number. Thank you. Now, if any members wish to leave at any point, could they please make themselves known to me through the chat function, and I will announce to the meeting that you are to leave. I will begin by asking the Democratic Services Officer to undertake a roll call of members of the committee to confirm who is present this evening, and then to confirm which officers, members of the public and visiting councillors are present. So over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members and officers. Just before I start, could I just ask Councillor Woodman, would you mind just muting your microphone and turning your camera off for a second until we get to item 4? Thanks very much. Chair, I'll do a roll call of members, and then I'll run through the officers that are joining us this evening.
Great.
Councillor Brooke.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Councillor Clear.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Present.
Thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Evans this evening. It takes me on to Councillor Horrell.
Good evening. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. And Councillor Thompson.
Hello, I'm present.
Thank you. I've noticed, Chair, we've also been joined by some other members who are not members of the advisory group, but are joining us this evening. And I've noticed Councillor Reid, Councillor Weston and Councillor Cook. I hope I haven't missed anybody from that list. In terms of officers present, we joined in the St Giles room this evening with Simon Finch, Corporate Head of Regulatory, from the local plan team, Adrian Fox, Toby Ayling, Bethany Stokes and Jill Lee. And Joan Ashton, I can see has also joined us. I think that's officers complete, Chair. And finally, before I hand back over, we would have noticed that we've been joined by a member of the public this evening, Councillor John Woodman, who's the chair of the Winchester District Association of Local Councillors, who's speaking under item 4 later on. Right. Okay. Thank you, Chair. That completes the roll call.
Right, okay, well, we move on to the agenda. We've covered apologies, so we might ask for a disclosure of interests. Any disclosures, pecuniary or otherwise?
Nothing indicated, Chair.
Right, okay. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of December. May I sign off these minutes, please?
Agreed.
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 Great. Right. In that case, we'll go on to agenda item 4, public and member participation. And there's one person.
Sorry, I have a question about minutes. It's Councillor Horrell. Apologies.
Oh, hello. Yeah. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair. I just was looking for a point of clarification as it relates to a prior set of minutes. Would this be an appropriate moment to ask, or would you prefer I ask later in the agenda?
No, by all means, ask now, since we're dealing with this.
Chair, thank you. It relates to the minutes that of our meeting that we held in September, and I looked back through the minutes to understand what we had resolved on the various presentations that we had, and it says that the presentation and update be noted, but I know in recent correspondence with the parishes, reference has been made to our sort of September decision regarding the approach that we would be taking in terms of our options. And my understanding, Chair, and just in terms of the clarity of the minutes and what we were presented with, was that there was a suggestion that approach 1 was to be modified, which obviously you have done and will be going through today, but it's not clear to me from the minutes that we actually agreed formally that that would be the very precise element. This seems an evolutionary process, but it seemed more definitive in what we'd said to the parishes, and I was just looking for clarity. And Chair, it may be not something you can deal with immediately this evening, but maybe we could look at and just clarify for me. Thank you.
I'm very happy to do that. Could you perhaps email me this? Because obviously you've thought about what you want to say, and then I can get an answer for you.
Chair, very happily share the documents with you and just highlight the words so that we can all understand exactly what is being said. Very happy to do that, Chair, and grateful for you to and the officers taking time to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we'll do that. Right. Where were we? Oh, yes, public and member participation. Now, John Woodman, perhaps you might like to make your public speaking contribution now.
I would love to. Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, committee, officers. Thanks for the opportunity to address you this evening. I do so as with 2 hats on, one as chair of Swanmore Parish Council, but also as chair of the Winchester District Association of Local Councils. You'll have all seen, well, certainly the committee will have seen the email I sent to Adrian earlier last week and his response to that email. The parishes across the district are concerned about the process for the current local plan, and in particular the timescales, an issue Adrian didn't address in his email response back to us. The original timescale for the local plan has the Regulation 18 consultation planned for August this year. And as far as we're aware, this has not changed. This is despite any town and parish consultations, well, no consultations occurring over the last 12 months, which is, at least 12 months later than originally planned. They were due at Q1 2021. Appreciate that that's driven by the lack of a headline number, which you've been struggled to get. If this date is staying, then the most important part of the process will be rushed through, resulting in the use of a flawed settlement ranking and hierarchy document, which could result in pushback when it comes to further scrutiny. A number of the parishes have highlighted issues with the data used to create that settlement and hierarchy table, but the team seem reluctant to update the information to provide a correct analysis with which to inform the local plan process, preferring to add the data later as an appendix to the document. We all know that the document is to show you've done your homework when it comes to scrutiny. However, the incorrect information is being used now to determine housing numbers and locations. As the housing numbers trickle out, we've seen 2 emails from the local plan team. One to councils saying they'll not be required to have any, and one to some councils saying that you will. rather than allowing the smaller councils to potentially bid for some extra housing, and believe it or not, some would like some, they are now excluded from the process based upon a process using flawed data. You'd get better buy-in from all groups if they were still included at this stage and offered the opportunity. Why not see which sites are suggested as the preferred ones by all councils and then work out how many extra you need to than dictating the shortfall to the remainder. I would encourage you to engage properly now and until the end of the process to get this right, moving your draft regulation 18 date rather than rushing something through which currently appears poorly thought out and executed. This will benefit all and deliver a plan that is fit for purpose rather than just a plan. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. I think that smaller parishes who wish to be consulted on housing numbers, that can be arranged. The fact that they haven't been asked to accommodate housing numbers at the moment doesn't prohibit them from accepting developments and infill settlements and so on. I notice Adrian has got his hand up and he's very much the expert in this, so I might turn to him to fill in the details, a bit more detail.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members and Councillor Woodman. Thank you for your comments. I'd like to address them if I can in turn. In terms of the settlement hierarchy, we have asked parish councils to check that, and some of them have come back with comments on those. We are reviewing those. I'd just like to clarify that we will be updating the settlement hierarchy, and the intention is to have an appendix in there that shows any parish council comments so that there is a clear and transparent way of demonstrating what we've done. It's certainly not just an appendix to the document to say that we are doing an updated settlement hierarchy, and we are looking at obviously the criteria in that settlement hierarchy as a result of obviously COVID, because clearly our requirements have changed. So please be rest assured that we are looking at settlement hierarchy. We have done a high level analysis of the comments that have come in to date, and they don't materially affect the settlement hierarchy itself. So we have done that, so please be rest assured with that. In terms of obviously the smaller settlements in the more rural locations, you were suggesting obviously a bid for extra housing. We've got to obviously produce a sustainable development strategy, and there is a danger there that obviously we would be putting potentially some large allocations in unsustainable settlements. So I am concerned about that. There is obviously the ability for minor infilling for those settlements, and they could come forward with, for example, if there is a local need, a rural exception policy or a need, and we'll be obviously rolling that forward into the new local plan. So like I say, we are engaging actively with the parish councils. Meetings have taken place this week and they're taking place next week. And the meetings that we've had today have been very positive, I'd like to report. And like I say, we are engaging actively where we can, but obviously there was a timing issue in terms of obviously we couldn't have those conversations with the parish councils until we'd done the number crunching, and we wanted to make sure we were right with those numbers before we had those meetings. But I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Thank you,
Adrian.
Just one quick question on that, Chair. So the minor infilling, are they included? Well, presumably they're not included in the overall numbers that you're targeting. Whereas actually, if you totted up all of the minor infilling, there's quite a substantial number across the district.
That's correct. They're not counted. But
Chair, sorry, if I could just answer that question, it might be easier. No, they're not, but obviously we do have a windfall allowance, and the windfall allowance is a public document that we've got on the website, and obviously they would be treated towards the windfall allowance, and that's why we've obviously got a windfall allowance that we have had obviously sites come forward under that policy at the moment, and that will be treated as a windfall site.
Thanks, Adrian. And then the target date for August to get your draft out, is that still the target?
We are still working towards that date, and like I say, we are engaging with the parish councils. A lot of the parish councils have already done considerable legwork and engagement. I was involved in at least one meeting this week with the parish council where they were actually very clear. They'd done engagement with their parish councils, and they were very clear about which sites they thought were possible sites for. Obviously, they wanted to go away and have another think. But a lot of parish councils have already done that engagement because the Sheila has been actually published. They've already done a lot of the legwork, and like I say, they haven't obviously identified the site yet, but they know which sites they are, and they will have a lot of local knowledge about those sites. And to be truthful, a lot of those sites have been around before in previous Sheilas, in previous local plans. So they're not actually, some of them they will be looking at those closely in terms of what they said previously. So I hope, obviously, at the moment we're on timetable. But obviously, we are working really hard because there's a lot of work to do. Can't underestimate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get that. I guess the concern was that what was 18 months of consultation from early 2021 to the end of 22 is now probably 5 months of consultation, and that was the concern period.
I think, Chair, if I could just come back to that, I think the document that the Councillor Woodman is referring to is the Local Plan Action Plan. And that was actually when the government was actually proposing changes to the planning system about growth, renewal and regenerate. And that was all linked to that. So the actual timetable that Councillor Woodman is referring to actually was involved in that, because I remember seeing the actual line in the Local Plan Action Plan. It does relate to when the government was proposing renewal, growth and regeneration and those discussions. So like I say, time has moved on. The government, as we know, haven't progressed that idea, and we're still waiting for obviously what they are going to do. But that was in relation to obviously the proposed changes to the planning system. Hope that clarifies. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian. Right, I don't think there's any more public speaking involved, so we'll go on to the agenda item 5, local plan visions and objectives. Toby Ayling and Bethany Stokes are going to do a short PowerPoint presentation on things to consider when drafting a new local plan vision, and outline some of the things to avoid and how the local plan vision needs to be linked back to policies in the local plan. I'll now hand over to Toby and Bethany to screen share the presentation, and I think afterwards we'll be happy to take any questions. So over to you, Toby.
Thank you, Chair. I'll now start to share the presentation. And forgive me, can everyone see that front page?
Yes, we can, Toby. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Right, thank you. Okay, so as the Chair outlined, we'll be taking you through a short presentation, Beth and myself, just to outline some backgrounds and issues around creating a vision and objectives for the local plan. Just to break things up a little, I'll be taking you through the first few slides on the National Planning Policy Framework and Planning Advisory Service guidance, just to set the scene. And Beth will then talk us through where we've got to date in this process with using existing consultation responses and information that we've gained through the council plan, feedback from the strategic issues and priorities consultation that was discussed with LPAG at the end of last year. And then we'll finish this presentation and then take on to the next item after questions, which is talking about an emerging vision and objectives for this emerging local plan. As mentioned, there are things that we need to think about as we construct a vision and objectives for emerging local plans. And first port of call really is the National Planning Policy Framework, which governs the production and is national policy for the production of local plans and other related planning documents. And the issues are really outlined here that I'll just try and briefly go through. The reference in paragraph numbers at the end of each bullet point are the paragraphs in the NPPF itself. But they, as you can see there, it is saying that succinct and up-to-date plans should provide a positive vision for the future of the area. But as always, there's caveated in the second bullet point, positively in a way that is aspirational but deliverable, and members will be aware there's a strong test in terms of deliverability for local plans, and that extends to the vision and objectives as well. A detailed point on the third bullet point, but it does come up often where large-scale development is proposed, which goes beyond the plan period. There's an expectation that there should be a vision that looks further ahead, for instance, at least 30 years. So that's something to be mindful of should plans expect development to go on for further than the standard 15-year time frame. There's also an expectation in national policy that there's a clear economic vision and strategy which proactively encourages sustainable economic growth. And obviously that depends on your context and what that means for your area. We'll come back to that in a minute. And also the final bullet point, which is possibly more it's risen in emphasis in recent years, is policy should set a clear design vision for the area. So that's the national plan and policy framework there. I was just going to move on to a few more anecdotal comments from the government's Planning Advisory Service on the next slide. So the Planning Advisory Service is there to provide guidance for, amongst other things, guidance for local authorities on how to prepare plans and undertake planning policy functions. And these are some of their comments on what we should be thinking about as we prepare a vision for this plan and for this area. I won't read them all out, but I would like to draw your attention to just a few, in particular the first bullet point, which reiterates and emphasises, and can't emphasise enough, this balancing between aspirational but realistic that they want us to try and achieve. That we do want to stretch ourselves, but it does have to be something that the local plan can deliver on. The next point I wanted to highlight was the third bullet point here, which is really that obviously you have a vision, but then you have objectives that sit below that vision, and they should flow from it and establish the way in which the plan area will deal with the issues that you believe are critical to be addressed. So you should be able to see how the objectives sit below but deliver on that vision. And finally, the point I wanted to highlight is the fifth bullet point down that starts generalised aspirations, which is an important point and something that potentially local authorities can fall into. And it says here, generalised aspirations are not locally specific and don't communicate how a difference can be made through the plan. And that's that issue about are the vision objectives actually saying something specific about your area, or are they just generally good things that could be said about almost anywhere? So I'll move on to a few more comments from the Planning Advisory Service just as background before handing over to Beth to talk about where we're at in more recent consultations and results. So this slide outlines some questions possibly for us to ask ourselves as we draft this work, which is all about, is this actually really doing the job that we want it to do? So questions to ask ourselves, is it about the priorities for this area? The first point. The second bullet point is that reiteration. Does this vision describe your area as opposed to anywhere? And then there's also the fourth bullet point I wanted to highlight, which is, can you translate that vision and objectives into policy, which is back to that aspirational yet realistic point it's highlighted in the introduction. And I guess the last thing I would want to highlight as well is the need or the expectation that these are concise statements which guide the rest of the plan, but don't reiterate or repeat things that are going to be dealt with more appropriately in the plan itself in terms of detailed policy outcomes and that sort of thing. So that's the, if you like, the national advice, both in the NPPF and from the Planning Advisory Service. I was now intending to hand over to Beth, who is going to present the second half of this presentation on where we're at to date in this process. I'll continue to share the presentation, so I'll be directed by Beth as to when she wants to move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Toby. Good evening, everyone, members and officers. So I'm just going to move on now to outline the council plan and the feedback that we got from our strategic issues and priorities consultation in respect of the vision and setting the objectives. Next slide. Okay, so the council plan, the priorities within this, we want to keep it aligned when we are creating the new vision for the local plan. So things such as tackling climate change and creating a greener district, living well, so all residents to live healthy and fulfilled lives with the right facilities and good support and mental health for everyone. Also looking at homes for all, and also homes that are affordable and also built in the right areas for lots of changing communities. Also looking at that vibrant local economy and restoring the vibrancy of our high streets and develop and retain the business base and begin that transition to a greener and more sustainable economy, while also providing high quality, good value and resilient services. Next slide, please. So when we look at the summary of the key points that were raised in this strategic issues and priorities consultation, when we ask the question, is the vision in the current local plan still appropriate for inclusion in the new local plan? Many responded by saying that we need to update and acknowledge the difference and the different challenges facing the district and recognise that shift away from high street shopping and towards more people working from home now with COVID-19. Also referring to climate change and Winchester City Council's carbon neutrality goals. Also looking at referring to that 15-minute neighbourhoods, promoting sustainable development and reducing CO2 emissions, and ensuring that the vision is not just Winchester city-centric and that it supports market towns and the rural areas, and also that we need to promote and prioritise brownfield land whilst protecting the countryside and increasing our green spaces and promoting biodiversity. Next slide, please. Just some more of the general feedback from our strategic issues and priorities consultation. So there were a lot of comments explaining that the carbon neutrality targets of 2030 were put into question. Some felt it might be a bit too ambitious, that there was maybe too much focus on sustainable development, that there might potentially be too many objectives within the vision, that there were more specific targets needed. They outline that many of the objectives included within the current local plan are out of our control and that performance measures are required, and some of the targets are quite general. So that was the main feedback that's sort of driving how we're going to change the local plan vision and objectives. Next slide, please, Toby. So just a quick recap on everything we've covered. So the vision needs to address the current spatial issues facing the district. It needs to be clear and planning policies where they can make a difference and where realistically it's not the correct document to address a particular issue if that needs updating. It needs to be specific to the Winchester plan area and it needs to be deliverable, and it will need to reflect the different spatial issues which face different parts of the district. It needs to be direct and easily understood, as Toby explained, and there needs to be a link between the spatial issues, the vision and the policy objectives, so we really need to see that clear link between them, and that the spatial priorities in the current local plan and the council plan and those that have which been identified through the consultation process have now been reviewed, which will help inform the proposed new vision. Next slide, please. So just to cover the next steps in this process, as it's sort of a continuous draft at the moment, and we will be looking at it again as we go through the emerging vision and objectives. So it will guide the production of draft policies and be published as part of the plan for the consultation. We may well change the detail as the local plan is worked up, and the plan will need to demonstrate how the vision and objectives will be delivered. So that's just a quick recap there of everything that we are planning to do next. Thank you, Toby. I'll hand back to you now.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Chair. That was actually the presentation we wanted to give under this item, which is just really setting the scene for the work that we're presenting in the next item, which is an emerging vision and objectives. But we thought it was worthwhile just having a quick recap on how we got to this point before we head into that. So I guess you may what you may have questions or want to see if members have questions at this point prior to us getting into the meat of where we're at the moment with the emerging vision and objectives for the next local plan.
Thank you, Toby and Bethany, for that. Yes, very useful. I think we might take questions now rather than waiting for the next section. Otherwise, it leads to confusion and so on. So, are there any hands up?
They're on currently, Chair. No. Oh, Councillor Horrell.
Councillor Horrell, please.
Chair, thank you, and thank you to Toby and to Beth. Could I just ask, in the MPPF, the whole concept of deliverability you've emphasised to us, aspirational but deliverable. How do we quantify deliverable? What are the criteria for achieving that, please?
With you, Toby.
Yes, from Chair. I mean, there are certain specific definitions of deliverability in terms of housing, land supply, and everything else that's in the NPPF. So, in other words, it's about being having great certainty to include, for instance, a delivery housing in the first 5 years, with less certainty required potentially, though I use that word advisedly, in the latter part of the plan period. But I think in more general terms, Council, which you may be referring to, I think there's more as well a wider aspect that inspectors are looking at the plan as a whole. Is it actually going to do what it says it's going to do in the round, as well as specific delivery of X number of houses? What are the other outcomes you're going to achieve? And in that case, it is much more of a judgment, a planning judgment, but this comes back to the emphasis, which we only touched on, which is the need for monitoring and a monitoring framework. In other words, how are you going to judge the success or otherwise of your plan? And that's where then you tend to have a raft of indicators across a range of subjects. Quite a long answer, I'm afraid, but there's a few specific and a few general points in there. I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you, Toby. Chair, can I just ask a quick supplementary? Is that monitoring programme again going to emerge as we go forward? So are you going to craft that to sit alongside the proposed vision and objectives?
If I may, Chair.
Of course.
Yes. Absolutely. Although with the caveat that actually, in terms of drafting and production, the monitoring tends to sit as much with the detailed policies, because obviously as it goes from the vision to objectives to detailed policies to monitoring, they tend to be drafted and thought about and brought forward as part of that process. So there should be a thread always, as we say, you know, through the whole lot, but it's quite closely associated with the individual policies as well.
Thank you.
Right, very coherent answer.
No other members indicated, Chair.
Right, okay, in that case, let's go on to the local plan proposed vision and objectives after that grounding in the first part. And Toby's going to talk us through this. And so the draft vision and objectives of the local plan, which has taken on board best practice, reviewing the current vision in the adopted local plan, the council plan, and comments that we have received from the strategic issues and priorities consultation. So, Toby, if you would like to carry on, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If you just bear with me, I'll just call up the Word document, which was for item 6, which starts on page 19 of your packs.
Yeah.
Apologies. Can everyone now see a Word document on the shared screen?
We can see it, Toby. I
Yes.
don't know
Yeah.
if you're able to zoom in on it slightly.
Hard to read.
Yes, apologies. Bear with.
Yeah,
Is that better?
much better. Thank you. Yeah.
No, yeah, thank you. So this is a different format because basically there's more words, there's more material here to share with you, members. So what I have here was I was just going to very briefly make a few comments about the Word document that's in your pack that just, if you like, pulls together the points that Beth's been making about where we're at in the production of this vision and objectives, and then come to our conclusion, which is a slightly recast but a draft version of the vision objectives for discussion with members now and potential inclusion as part of the emerging local plan as it goes forward. So just by way of introduction, if I may, in terms of the document you have in front of you, and I will scroll slowly through it as I go. So on the first page and in this dark box here, this is actually the existing vision for the adopted local plan, the local plan part 1, the core strategy, which sets out, if you like, there's a statement here about Winchester district with some key a description, if you like, of some important aspects, and as well then in the 3 bullet points it talks about 3 different spatial areas: the county town of Winchester, then Waterville and Whiteley, and then market towns and villages, and talks about what they're seeking to achieve through the local plan in each of those aspects of it. Now, I don't want to go on to that in any great length, but I hope to draw out hopefully some improvements as we move forward from here in terms of our redrafting and thinking about how we may take this forward. But that's the adopted vision anyway. So just at the bottom of this document, there's just a bit of establishing a point that, as Beth said, there was a strategic issues and priorities consultation carried out, which talked about the adopted vision. Is it still the right vision for the new local plan? Are there any improvements? Is it still fit for purpose? And members at LPAG would have received a presentation for that in September with regards to what the outcomes of that consultation were, and Beth reiterated them. There's also a note here that there's the Winchester Town Forum is considered a vision for the city itself to 2030, which had a slightly different take, rather than, if you like, a straight town planning sense, in that there were spatial issues, but there was also things about the way in which regeneration and change is brought to Winchester and how that goes forward. But obviously that's all part of the mix, and that's all for us to think about. I'll go on to the next page. So what we've done is we've been thinking about, forgive me, this is a proposed vision for the local plan. What we've done is we've been thinking about the consultation responses we've had to date, including people saying that some of the objectives, for instance, there's too many, or that the vision needs a bit refreshing. And we've looked at what we may say here. And in effect, what we've come to a conclusion is that there's two main aspects of it. First of all, we wanted to include a much more beefed up initial section, setting out what's important about Winchester district in a concise way that fits the sort of, the expectations for a very concise and short document. And that's the paragraph you see in front of you here. So the first paragraph starting Winchester district, the idea is that really sets the scene overall, the first few sentences in effect in the plan that set out what we're trying to achieve. We are trying to be more Winchester specific. We are referring to key aspects that we hope people will recognise. In other words, talking about chalk streams, talking about National Park, talking about things that are specific to this area. And then we talk about as well, perhaps more than previously, what we're trying to achieve through here, such as mitigate climate change and help with the climate emergency in as far as this document can. I think what I tried to say is that we're trying to have more hooks here without going into full detail, because of course that's all to follow in the plan with the objectives and then the policies. Anyway, moving on, I'll just scroll down at the second half of the vision. and it is following broadly the same format as the previous one, you'll note, is that we still think that the distinction between three particular areas, or types of areas, if you like, in Winchester District still applies. So again, the county town of Winchester forming the first section of what we're actually looking to achieve in each area. And then just briefly, then on to the areas in the south, possibly less specific about Whiteley and west of Waterlooville, that sort of thing, because actually it's the whole of the south area is affected by and impacted by those strategic developments and the influence of the South Hampshire economy, and therefore we wanted to be more broader in how we approach that. And finally, again, the market towns and rural villages, but again being a bit more information this time around on what we're seeking to achieve there. If I may, I was just going to run through the last few aspects of it, Chair, before going over to questions. Is that all right?
I think that would be a sensible way forward.
Thank you. So what we're saying is that the vision is there, and then under the vision, what we haven't addressed hugely in this presentation are the objectives in the previous scene setting one. But Beth did outline the fact that some draft objectives were published as part of the strategic issues and priorities consultation last year, but people were sort of we had a lot of comments back and there's an awful lot of them, things can get a bit lost. They weren't quite sure how it was all going to fit together. In the meantime, we've also had a bit of a rethink in the fact that we've also got, rather than in the previous times we'd look at social, economic and environmental objectives, we actually have a council plan that talks about things in a different way in 5 or 6 different other priority areas. We thought it may make better sense to align those with them, and that's why the proposed objectives you see in your document are recast from the 3 if you like main headings of sustainable development into this. It's trying to make it more Winchester centric, and I'll just outline the headings, I think, rather than each individual thing. Tackling climate emergency in greener district, living well, homes for all, and vibrant local economy. And that's deliberately trying to mirror where we are at with the with the council plan. Now, I'm not going to go into the objectives here because there's a lot of them, and hopefully members have had an opportunity to read them now. I just wanted to explain the structure of the document, where we've got from, and how we've got to where we are now in our drafting. And otherwise, Chair, I was going to leave it there for questions and comments for members. Really, we're
Chair, Toby's on mute.
Yeah.
Chair, you're also on mute.
Sorry, Toby, just at the end there, Toby, you went over onto mute. You're still muted now. There we go.
I hope that didn't happen a long time ago. I do apologise.
It happens to us all, doesn't it?
I think I was just, forgive me, I was just saying that I wasn't intending to go through all the objectives. Good grief. I mean, members have them in writing. We're seeking comments now for us to go away and reflect on, and obviously, but these will feed into and will help us guide us in the drafting of our policies. And so that's why it's helpful that we take these to LPAG at this point in the plan production process. So thank you, Chair.
Very, very well done, Toby. I think it was very good to have the objectives linked into the council plan. It makes a lot more sense. Right. Are there any questions coming up?
Nothing so far, Chair, that I can see. Oh, Councillor Horrell.
Councillor Horrell and Councillor Brooke.
Yeah.
Councillor Horrell first.
Chair, I have several. How would you like me to handle them? Shall I say them all at this point, or would you like me to just give one and then come back in?
I think if you could say them all.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, thank you for the draft, as you say, very helpful to have something to respond to. I have several questions that would be helpful to clarify, if I may. The first one is in the opening paragraph, where we say that we want to enhance the sustainability of communities, natural environment and the economy, all in keeping with the council plan, and respond to the wider relationship with neighbouring authorities. I'd really like to understand what that means. Is that my favourite organisation, Push? And if so, what does that mean? In the three spatial areas, and I understand completely, and it's sort of consistent, I don't think anything's fundamentally changed so much that those three definitions are not appropriate. The one element, and you said, Toby, that you were being less specific about Whiteley and Waterlooville. However, Whiteley somehow, for me, falls between the stools, as it were. Whiteley is a very substantial economic centre, and it doesn't really fall into the market towns and rural areas in the same way, and it's a slightly different economy and settlement in our district, and it feels as if we've slightly lost it here, and I'm not sure whether we should be less specific is my question, and whether it should somehow be identified. Question 2. Question 3 is about the vibrant local economy objectives, and I was slightly surprised that when we talk about growing the visitor and tourism economy, creative and educational sectors, we don't really think or mention that we're a huge agriculture economy here in the district, particularly around food and drink, and we don't mention that at all, although we're told that that is a very important and growing part of the economy. And nowhere in any of this did I see the word digital. And I see the element about infrastructure, but we had a very good presentation the other day about digital and how we have to really build that in. And I wonder whether that's worth a specific mention in the objectives when we talk about the economy. So those are my questions. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to raise those.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Some useful questions there. Would you like to try to answer those, Toby?
Yes, if I may, Chair. I'll make some comments, and obviously we can perhaps take it from there if members wish to. Take them, I think, in order, hopefully. Yes, the comment about wider relationship with neighbouring authorities. I think what we were trying, the attempt there was actually to try and pick up on the, as a planner, I was trying not to say the sub-regional area or the county of Hampshire or that sort of thing, but it was trying to pick up the transport links, the nature and ecological links, the housing market area links, the wider economic links, rather than, I will absolutely say now, any specific, political local government organisation or type arrangements going on. It was more about actually recognising the fact that Winchester is linked with our neighbours. We are part of a wider area and obviously have strong overlapping interests with them. Social, economic, and environmental. So it was an attempt to cover those areas. In fact, in my view, it might as well, on reflection, have said with neighbouring areas, but although that may not have quite got across the same issue. But that was where we were coming from with that drafting those. So if I may, I'll move on to your other comments. You outlined perhaps we're not being clear enough that we're talking about Whiteley, for instance, when we talk about still areas of change in the southern part of the district and the relationship there. I think clearly we are talking about Whiteley. You know, Whiteley is clearly an area that is in any event going to come for change, because of course development will still be ongoing during this plan period on the back of decisions previously taken. And so it's just whether it's a more accurate to say, and I on balance thought it was, to recognise the fact that there are other areas in the southern parishes that are subject to development pressures purely because of their proximity to the main drivers of development needs, you know, the M20, M27, Southampton, Portsmouth, that sort of thing. It may be that we could, well, of course, we could, for instance, say areas of south, including significant settlements such as Whiteley and West Waterville, you know, to actually give a bit more of a local flavour of this would be an appropriate amendment to consider. So it's something for us to think about there. And then turning to the objectives on the 2 on the vibrant local economy, I do accept the fact that we do not mention at present. Well, it's not one of the examples, if you like, or one of the key aspects listed under the first bullet point as growing, but there is potentially, I mean, there is nothing to prevent necessarily agriculture, food and drink industries being mentioned there, and obviously the nature of that is changing over years as well in terms of production and the economic activity arising from that. So it's something that we could very much recognise. I believe the wording was more to tie with more recent, forgive me, council reports on green growth and all the rest of it, but nonetheless, as a significant area it could be. And finally, telecommunications and broadband infrastructure. Yes, we could mention it. We do talk about communications infrastructure, and I must admit, as a team, we talked about whether we should say broadband, and we thought that communications infrastructure appropriately addressed that. But it's really a drafting issue rather than a point issue. We absolutely accept and understand that broadband is a key business need and key social need going forward. It's just whether we're clear in that. We can't mention everything in detail, but we could potentially say communications and broadband infrastructure at that point.
You're muted.
Oh, Chair, may I just say thank you, Toby. I think on the economic objectives, a bit of the sharpening of the pencil wouldn't go amiss. I think there is an opportunity, and communications infrastructure sounds very general. I know we have a real heart for, you know, some digital intervention somehow, given it's not great in parts of our district. And I would welcome your suggestion to include Whiteley and Waterloo, for example. I think that would be helpful because, as I say, Whiteley somehow doesn't quite fit some of the other more general comments you've had. So if they could be considered, Chair, that would be most helpful, as Toby has just outlined. Thank you.
Thank you. We will most certainly consider them. There's some useful points there. Councillor Brooke.
Thank you, Chair. So the questions I had, firstly, I just wanted to say, we've just gone through the process of saying that a local vision shouldn't be generic, it should be quite specific. And yet some of it looks very generic. I know we've made specific reference to things like chalk streams and the like, but it does feel quite generic, and understanding that a lot of the things that we wish for Winchester would be what people wish across the country for local plans all over the place. It does still feel quite generic. So I just wanted to pass that as a comment. A couple of questions I had. So do we have to, as we go through the local plan process, refer back to how these particular policies are putting into effect the vision that we had? Because I'm wondering, for example, how our vision piece on the climate change might affect our housing numbers, and how we then reference that to say, and these policies are taking care of that part of the vision. Excuse me. And also, what does this vision directly impact the numbers and distribution of the houses that we're putting in? I know that we're working to a certain set of numbers, but just wondered if that impacts our vision, and then our vision likewise impacts those numbers both ways. Thank you.
Right, thank you for your question. Toby, if you'd like to have a stab at answering that.
Yes, certainly. I think the first, I mean, I hear the points about it being potentially still rather generic. I guess from our perspective, it has to be sort of broad enough to capture a lot of other aspects of it underneath. But there is a balancing act here. But I'll reflect on that more. The first question, I think, was about how we can show that the plan actually delivers on the objectives and the vision as it comes forward, and that is really key. It is important that we show that the plan is delivering on this. It has come up at a recent other local plan examination where the inspector was not satisfied that the plan was really nailing how it was delivering on the vision and objectives, and he wasn't happy with that. So it's about, when the plan is being brought forward for members to view, that we are able to make it clear and easily understood how each aspect of the vision and objectives is being delivered by the plan. So the previous plan we've got, the adopted plan, listed under each objective, each of the relevant policies in the plan that were most relevant to and delivering on that policy. And that's certainly something we can't draft that for you now because we don't have the policies now, but that is an approach that we think does in principle stand us in good stead going forward. So in some way, though, showing how it goes from vision to objectives but then on to policies will be important for us as a drafting matter to make it clear for everyone, for you and for the local plan inspector, how that is dealt with. There was also a question about how the emerging vision and objectives can influence and fit with both the level of development and the distribution of development. And I think it'd take the easier part of that first. In terms of numbers, what for instance, cutting to it, what no local plan vision or objectives can do is change, for instance, national plan policy on assessing housing need, the sort of levels of development that councils are expected to address for, certainly for housing, and that side of things. So those are pretty much given to us as parameters to consider through the plan, no matter what our vision and objectives is. In terms of the distribution of development, it is a little bit more nuanced. I mean, they have to fit, the vision and objectives should fit the strategy, and the strategy should fit the vision and objectives. And I know obviously this is all emerging work, but we do believe that this is actually compatible with and complements the emerging work we've got on the spatial strategy. So numbers very little, but how it's distributed, absolutely, I guess, is a rough rule of thumb, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Very useful answer. Right, are there any more hands up?
No, Chair.
Right, okay. In that case, let's roll on to...
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Horrell.
Councillor Horrell, right.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just too slow on putting the hand up. Could I just clarify something that was commented on, I think, by Mr. Fox earlier, and raised by the Swanmore Parish Council Chair, Councillor Woodman, that because it's a piece of information that goes into the pot in terms of how we're developing. The settlement hierarchies, and obviously that feeds into the sort of analysis that you're doing here for the vision and objectives. Many of the parishes were vexed that they felt they were not correct and have fed those in. You indicated, I think, Mr. Fox, you're going to update those just to understand where that fits in the process. So to confirm they are going to be updated and when they will come along as part of this next sort of emerging phase.
Right, thank
Thank
you.
you.
I think I better ask Adrian to answer that one, if he could, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Horrell. We are getting comments. We want to try and do this all at once in terms of obviously the comments, because it makes sense to obviously update it. We are juggling that at the moment with obviously parish councils meetings. So I can't give you a definitive date, but it is in hand. We are looking at it and it will be published as soon as we can. But like I say, I can't give you a definitive date because at the moment the team are juggling numerous things. And I want to make sure when we publish it again that we're all happy with it. But like I say, please be rest assured that we've got comments from the parish councils. We are taking them on board and we are giving it a serious amount of time to obviously take into account and obviously reflecting what needs to change with it. But like I say, I can't give you a definitive date because it's on the to-do list with many other things. So I hope that's okay. Thank you.
No, thank you. So long as it runs alongside
It will.
Mr. Fox,
Yep.
that's helpful. Thank you, Chair. And could I just also clarify, just again, as we go into the, because this all feeds into, again, the spatial sort of discussion that we're having here as part of the draft. In the briefing on Friday that all members were given about the housing part of the allocation primarily, can I just clarify any request to provide homes for the Partnership for South Hampshire is not currently included? It was sort of a question we were clarifying earlier about windfall sites and additional smaller settlements. Just to clarify that the numbers we were given on Friday do not include anything that we potentially could be asked. We haven't put a estimate in at this stage, just so that I'm clear as to where we're heading. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you.
Adrian, I think, Chair, and I can come in after that.
Okay. Adrian, if you would like to answer that, please.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, yeah, the presentation we gave to all members obviously went through the unknown variables at this stage, one being obviously the standard methodology and one being the push. And I think we identified on Friday that we included a headroom and we're not allocating a specific amount to push or the standard methodology. All we're doing is including an element of headroom in the figures that we've got to accommodate that. And I think it'd be wrong to obviously put our hand up now and say it's this for push or this for the standard methodology because there's too many unknowns. But to build in a headroom, we think is a sensible and pragmatic way forward. I hope that clarifies it. Thank you.
Right,
and
thank you.
Could I just ask, is the headroom 10%, 50%, just so that we understand the contingency that we've got included, which is essentially a very sensible piece of planning at this point.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm afraid I don't have the figures to hand, but like I say, we have included a headroom to allow for obviously changes in the standard methodology, but I don't have the figures to hand. But there is an element of headroom in there. And like I say, hopefully we'll know more by the end of March in terms of obviously what that standard methodology figure will come out with.
Thank you.
Right. Have there been any more questions?
No, Chair.
Right. In that case, we'll go on to the agenda item 7, local plan design southeast reports. As part of the development of the local plan, we're extremely keen to strengthen the way that we as a council can really promote and reinforce the role of high quality design across the whole of the district. The City Council appointed Design Southeast to facilitate a number of design workshops which were attended by local people, local organisations, councillors, consultants and developers. These were hands-on sessions, and we received the outputs from these 3 workshops, which are included in the agenda. Adrian Fox will now take you through a short PowerPoint presentation that has identified the key issues from the workshops and how they can be used to shape and inform the new local plan. And we'll take some questions afterwards. So, Adrian, if you'd like to carry on, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll screen share the presentation with you. Right, can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So as the Chair said, we had 3 workshops that we convened before Christmas, one in October, November and late November. They're listed on the screen, so I won't kind of go through to them. The first one was about design policy, which I'll outline obviously the outputs from that. The second one was very much centred on Winchester town, and the third one picked up the market towns and rural villages. It is very important that obviously this is a key part of the evidence base to inform the new policy in the local plan, but not every suggestion may not necessarily be included. And it's just a slight kind of health warning with that. There's some great ideas and we do want to include as much as we can, but obviously there may be some ideas that go a bit further than what we want to include. So in terms of workshop 1, this is really echoed, and we really want to make this point immensely strong into the local plan, that design is a process and it's an iterative process. What we want to do is raise the bar and make sure that it's very, very clear that it is a process. And you may have to have many hats on to do that process. So you might have to have your climate emergency hat on to think about how the design obviously picks up on orientation, solar gain, access. You may have to have your active transport hat on in terms of how does the design actually promote people to use public transport. So in other words, it's not just a dark alleyway by the side of a house. And what we want this to do is obviously really document this and get developers to justify, rather than coming up with a solution. Here we go, here's a site, it's 17 dwellings. So we really want to strengthen that point throughout the local plan process. It's a design process. So on page 5 of the workshop 1 report, there's quite a helpful little kind of target, if you can call it that. And it kind of was an icebreaker, but it pitched very well what people actually thought of the current local plan in terms of obviously what it was achieving and where we needed to improve. And that's just quite useful feedback in terms of obviously where we are and what we can improve. Delegates then were kind of in groups, and we went through all the existing policies in the local plan on design, and we did a simple kind of keep, delete, amend, and any comments. And that is really, really fantastic, because that was feedback from kind of consultants, developers and councillors who've actually really used the plan on a regular basis. And that's really powerful to hear their feedback on specific policies. And Toby will be leading on the new design topic in the local plan. In terms of workshop 2, this was one I particularly enjoyed, mainly because you've got to roll your sleeves up and you've got a plan out and you know to annotate a plan. And I think people really embrace that, of actually getting their felt tip markers, pens out and actually drawing on the plan. And we got some fabulous feedback about connectivity, about places that could be improved. And one of the outputs we got was 5 areas of opportunity in Winchester that basically we identified through the workshop process that could be improved. And those are really powerful, because if we can include those areas in the local plan, we can then obviously hopefully use those to obviously not only progress ideas for that area, but also potentially obviously if there was a funding bid coming along, it would obviously set down a key marker. These are the areas that we really want to get right in Winchester and make it a better place. We also, part of the workshop, got delegates to identify a number of sites within to and close to Winchester that had the potential to be redeveloped, refurbished. Rather interestingly, the outputs from that workshop identified a number of private car parks within the city that obviously people thought, well, you know, could they be redeveloped? Obviously, they would need obviously the permission of the landowner, but it was quite interesting in terms of obviously a mapping exercise, because we are very keen to promote obviously brownfield first, and obviously what opportunities there are out there. So obviously we need to have a look at that carefully when obviously we're looking at obviously the Winchester town figure. Also, we looked at the existing movement network and the issues around this. It was really great to kind of hear feedback about how we can increase kind of what we call planners as permeability and connectivity. And that was really useful. And it must be an important point I must stress is that these workshops are useful for my team in the local plan, but also obviously we want to make sure that other teams of the council also see it, because obviously clearly the movement network is being developed as part of the movement strategy. So we need to make sure some of these ideas are obviously taken forward. But a great way to identify how we can improve obviously the permeability and legibility of the city centre. Workshop 3, we wanted to basically take that idea out into the market towns and rural areas. We asked delegates, which was quite an interesting kind of exercise, what makes a successful development and what makes a poor development. And it was quite interesting. We put on the plan, we asked people to take photographs or share on the screen what they thought was a successful development and why they thought it was a successful development. And there was some really interesting feedback from that kind of icebreaker, which was really good. Some of the key identified things that people came up at the workshop was local distinctiveness and materials are key issues that makes a place and makes a place important. And then we want to obviously stress that point in the new local plan. And obviously, because we were talking about the kind of rural area, we obviously need to respect obviously its setting and its obviously place, and obviously make sure that development's appropriate for that area. And obviously some of the kind of smaller kind of market towns, obviously they have very distinct characteristics because they're very much kind of on the edge of obviously kind of perhaps the South Downs National Park or the countryside. And we need to integrate landscape and open spaces, and that's obviously become a very critical issue as a result of obviously coming out of COVID, about obviously how can we kind of make places more attractable, how can we encourage people to walk and enjoy the kind of surroundings. The importance of village design statements came out, and obviously they will be obviously eventually moving into local design codes and using local knowledge to influence the design process. And it was an interesting exercise. You'll see in the workshop 3 reports that we mapped the characteristics that came from delegates against the National Model Design Framework, and that was just quite a useful exercise to see where obviously the importance for obviously a rural town and market areas where it actually came from. And in terms of poor development, I'm sure we could all point to some that obviously could be improved. And this comes back to the point about obviously promoting active travel and obviously movement network and trying to make sure that we don't design places with obviously the car dominance or car at the forefront, and how we can obviously look at parking arrangements, how we look at obviously overdevelopment of a site, and how we can obviously ensure that we're not promoting obviously bland or lacking kind of character development. And in other words, we want to make sure it's not development that could be anywhere. It says something about the place. And like I said, it was mapped, the feedback was mapped against the 10 characteristics in the model design code. So in terms of the next steps, we do want to consider all the recommendations and weed this into the local plans in terms of how we deal with Winchester town and the market towns and rural area. And obviously develop a new topic on high quality design and living well. And I think that's really important to put that at the forefront, again, with obviously the other topics, giving it a topic by itself so it kind of gets its own gravitas that is needed. And finally, Chair, I would like to thank everybody that attended the workshops and who made a really valuable and constructive contribution to the workshop. You never quite know how these workshops are going to go. But we were really pleased with the outputs and really pleased with the enthusiasm and the desire to obviously make design obviously a much more prominent feature in the local plan. So I shall stop there, Chair, but happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed the workshops too, and I think they were very useful. I enjoyed the first one when there were a lot of different, there was developers and architects and other people there, all with a lot of experience, and it was a very constructive debate. It was very, very creative, very useful. Right, shall we go on to questions now?
I'm not. Oh, Councillor Horrell.
Councillor Horrell, please. And then Councillor Weston.
Thank you, Chair. A question that about how the plan develops. We hear much disquiet, and I think the planning team, perhaps not necessarily just the strategic planning team, but the planning team more generally, often hear that the village design statements that are drafted don't always have the sort of recognition of that the parishes think they deserve. And as we move forward and we evolve the whole element of design, how are we going to ensure that design is so much more sort of wedded to our policies and our approach to planning? At the moment, the way it's done feels a little sort of running in parallel rather than integrated. In terms of design coming up the agenda, how is that going to work in reality in the policies that we put together? Thank you.
Perhaps I might make a point. I mean, I've looked at quite a lot of village design statements, and I accept the fact that sometimes they're not given their full weight. I think the problem is that they need to be very specific, and a lot of them, especially in the past when there was less experience, tended to be very descriptive about something and not necessarily be dealing with case by case design issues that had popped up, for example, at parish council planning meetings. So I think there's a sort of two-way process to get really good village design statements done. But perhaps I might pass on to Adrian, who has a lot more expertise in all this than I could ever hope to have.
Thank you, Chair. No, you answered that very eloquently. I think it is obviously making them practical documents that are easily understood. And an example of that is obviously identifying, obviously, if there are important view corridors and obviously where those are and why they're important. But I think in terms of obviously the way that we are thinking, and it is only preliminary thoughts, is I think by giving its own topic in the local plan, it obviously highlights how important and how serious this is. It's really pleasing that the government's obviously put that up the agenda with the National Model Design Code. I think that's really encouraging. We certainly don't need to repeat what's in that, but I think we obviously need to allow the local plan, and local plan we're working on at the moment. Obviously, perhaps we'll have strategic policies for each of the topics, and obviously it's allowing the hook to enable other things to come forward, such as VDSs, or if they metamorphose into local design codes themselves, to add some more local kind of distinctiveness, local issues to it, to the National Model Design Code. The National Model Design Code is a really good document in terms of obviously the 10 characteristics. And I think by giving it that gravitas in the local plan, we can obviously put it at the more forefront of people's minds, and having that local community kind of buy-in and their knowledge and expertise will obviously hopefully address that point. But that's our intention. That's our working kind of work in progress at the moment. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Very helpful to understand. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Weston, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Actually, most of my question has actually been answered, but what I am concerned about, and I'm going to say that we are doing a local VDS or a parish design statement for Soberton and Newtown and the areas of the Soberton parish. And my concern is that the parish council do not want to embrace the design codes. And I think it's really important that they do. And is there a document that Winchester can update to actually encourage parish councils to look at them? Because I think the design codes are, the 10 design codes are absolutely excellent, and they can be adapted to every sort of environment and every characteristic in our district. So I think they are a fundamental document that we should be giving a lot of weight to, and we should be encouraging parishes to, as you said, Chairman, to actually make their parish design statements or their village design statements more specific in line with those design codes?
Right. Yes, I take your point about encouraging them to take on what's in the design codes and urging them to be as specific about something as they can be. And that is something, if you limit densities or suggest a village pattern or something like that, if you can do it in a diagram and make it as hard and fast as possible, that's something that can be reacted to. But as I said, some of these tend to be very interesting local histories and travelogues, but not totally watertight. I'll pass that over to Adrian and see if he's got any ideas about how we can get the parishes to take on more of the government's documentation.
Thank you, Chair. Like I say, my first point will be obviously to make sure obviously the parish council are aware of obviously National Model Design Code, because obviously that's a good starting point. And like I say, it is making them as specific as possible. I think you're aware, Councillor Weston, that we are talking to the South Downs National Park about whether or not we can actually design a template that we can help parish councils follow to provide them with those kind of clues about what we want in certain sections and how specific we live. That work's still ongoing, hasn't reached a conclusion, but I think things like that in terms of obviously how we can help parish councils help themselves to be more specific, and that would obviously be beneficial. But like I say, that work's still in progress. But like I say, I would encourage all parish councils to have a look at the National Model Design Code, because it is a good read. It's one of the better documents the government's come out with. It's really, really good in terms of obviously clear explanation, and it's really a user-friendly document. So I'd encourage everybody to have a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. But I'm afraid our parish council just poo-pooed it when I mentioned it to them.
Well, that's local democracy, I'm afraid, isn't it? It's also worth encouraging them to look at on the internet at other examples done by similar sized settlements and so on. And it's a huge guide about, it gives you a lot of inspiration about really what works well. And work, how you might express things graphically and deal with local issues. Hello, Councillor Weston.
Thank you. Yes, I've done all that, Chair. I've done that and I've passed that information on to them. So, but we can only hope.
Well, I'm very happy to advise them. I've done, various people have approached me to do a sort of critique of what they've done in the past. And I'm very happy to, give my tuppence worth, if that would help.
Thank you. I won't take up any more time of the meeting, but I will be in touch with you afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Who else has got a hand up?
No, none that I can see, Chair.
Right. Well, I think in that case, we've come to the end of the agenda.
Oh, Councillor Horrell, Chair. Sorry.
Councillor Horrell, please.
Chair, if I may, I have a couple of questions about what's going on following our briefing and the letters to parishes, which is not on the agenda, but I think given we've been discussing it all in the last week, it would be helpful just to clarify whilst we're all together, if you're happy to allow me to ask that question.
Yes, I think that's very important. We're very keen to encourage the involvement of the parishes and of the ward councillors with the parishes. So might I pass that to Adrian, please?
Chair, could I therefore ask specifically, and thank you for obviously including us in the parish meetings where they want us along too, and the like. Can I just understand, obviously we're coming to purdah time, we're doing the meetings in the next week at breakneck speed, so I understand Adrian's point earlier that it's all rather busy at the moment. Where do we go? So we are having one sort of initial meeting to give a briefing as such, but then what happens in terms of that follow-up? And I think it probably plays to some of the questions asked by Councillor Woodman in his correspondence and and earlier. Could I just understand that, please? So it just saves asking it in the meetings next week.
Sure. Okay. Simon Finch, if you would like to answer that, please.
Happy to answer that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Horrell. What we wanted to do to make sure that we got the conversations underway and we were able to share the figures that we'd come up with in terms of making the estimates that we talked about when we briefed you last Friday. And it's an ongoing discussion because obviously it will take time for the parishes to digest that and also to think about how they might approach and talk to your good selves as well. As we've talked about before in terms of that relationship between the parishes and the ward council is also important, of course, for them to have that dialogue. So whilst obviously we would not be doing any public consultations, as you wouldn't expect us to, or anything like that during the pre-election period, if parishes wish to, or a ward member or members wish to have a discussion with us about how they're moving that process forward, hopefully culminating in some suggestions about how they are able to accommodate the growth that is being put forward in, as we've outlined in those letters, then that will be something. But they would need to be obviously meetings that were dealt with in the right manner. But it's a case of what we wanted to do, certainly now and publicly, was to get the information out there, to get the numbers shared, and to begin that dialogue, culminating hopefully in some proposed solutions, effectively in those settlements in the hierarchy, as to how they might meet those housing numbers. And we're happy to provide guidance to to parishes that are going through that process. And as I say, I think Adrian's been more closely involved than I have in terms of the team about some of the discussions they've already had, because those meetings are underway, and thus far I think they've been generally reasonably favourably received in terms of how those parishes feel they can take that forward. And just the other thing I just wanted to say, which came up with Councillor Woodman answered earlier, and I think it just bears repeating because other members may have this in their mind as well. Even those that are not in the hierarchy and have received a slightly different, obviously, communication from us than the ones that are, does not mean to say no growth, as was explained earlier, but it bears repeating. It means that those parishes are still able to have growth. They just won't be necessarily given a specific target or housing number by the City Council. But as you know, members will know, and planning committee members will recall, we do have infill policy, etc., that allows smaller scale growth to occur, limited infilling, redevelopment of sites as well. I wouldn't want anybody to take away from the meeting tonight to think, well, if you're not on the list, you're not coming in. In other words, you don't get any housing. That's not what we're saying. But obviously, as Adrian explained earlier, it's really a case of focusing most of the development on the most sustainable settlements. And also, it bears repeating, we are most definitely listening to the comments coming back from the parishes on any information in the hierarchy they think is out of date or we've got wrong. And as Adrian has explained, we will most definitely be taking that on board. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, could I just clarify then with Mr. Finch? It is some parish councils will also be in election period because there are a significant number this time going through elections. And there may be parish councils and ward members who want to have discussions. Are we facilitating an understanding of what is allowed in this period and what isn't? Because obviously PERDA brings sensitivities, and if you've got both organisations, a city council ward and a parish council, both in an election period, are we assuming that they can have meetings about the discussions that we're having as a briefing this week and next week in that period? Because I'm sure there'll be officers of those councils looking for clarity about what is allowable at this time, given the very significance of the conversations, as it were.
Right. Yeah, that's how I can take that. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as we say, obviously, we are here to have discussions that we would have anyway with parish councils, regardless, in terms of having those liaison meetings with them as we go through the local plan process. I think the adage I would always say, if in doubt, ask. If they want clarity, if a member wants clarity on anything, then I'm sure that we'll be able to provide that if they're uncertain about you know, what may be appropriate in their parish and what isn't. But generally speaking, what I'm saying, I suppose, is we want the conversation. We want to get the figures out there, get the conversations underway. The Adrian's team are there to help with that and to provide guidance, etc., to those parish councils and ward members that want to be involved in that. But if there's any question or doubt or query over what might be appropriate in that context and what isn't, then the simple advice would be always ask before you go ahead with any particular event or whatever it might be.
But Chair, I'd be assuming that let's just take an example, that Mr. Fox yourself would not be able to come to a public meeting to discuss Sheila sites in a parish with a ward that has an election. That would not be acceptable at this time.
As I said before, Councillor Horrell, yes, going out into public meetings like that clearly wouldn't be something. What we wanted to know, you're absolutely right, and it wouldn't be appropriate to do that. But what it is appropriate to do is to keep the conversations going in a structured and managed way that doesn't go into that sort of territory. And that's what we've done by initiating that dialogue. But no, absolutely, I don't think the council will be planning any sort of public meetings, etc., after the on and after the 20th of March. Thank you, Chair.
Right, is that clear now?
Yes, Chair, then could I just, I think there was a question earlier, but I don't think we got a very specific answer. In terms of responding to the request, can you fit this one in? Would you accept the Sheila site? Which one do you think is best? When is the deadline for parishes and the like to provide that information to you so that it can be usefully included in the deliberations for drafting the first part of the local plan?
Thank you, Chair. I will, if I may, Councillor Horrell, I'll pass it to Adrian. I mean, I think I would answer that one, but let's make sure that that we get the answer correct. So if I can ask Adrian just to comment on when we would like to see the feedback coming in from the parishes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Yeah, the discussions we've had to date with the parish councils has indicated that a lot of them have done a lot of work already. So what we're saying to them is, can you basically give us a response by the end of April on your the sites that we think might be appropriate? Now, some of them have already done a lot of legwork on this and a lot of work already with engaging with their local community. Now, if they encounter a problem with that deadline, we're saying to them, can you please contact us? Because, like I say, we appreciate not all parishes are the same. Not all parishes are the same in terms of the Sheila sites, but we are saying to them, the working programme we're going for is the end of April. If you have a problem with that, please let us know. But the ones we've spoken to today seemed quite already done a lot of legwork, so they were quite kind of relaxed with that timetable. And certainly the Sheila information's been in the public domain since December. And before, like I say, I mentioned a lot of these sites have been around before. They've been around in previous local plans. The parish council will be very familiar with a lot of the sites. There will be some new sites, but like I say, a lot of the sites, they tend to come around. That's the very nature of them, because that's why they put them forward. But that's the broad timetable that we're working towards.
And so Chair, just to clarify, it could be that you can't have a public meeting because you're in Purda, officers can't attend, parishes may have got a number they weren't expecting, different from perhaps their anticipation, but they have to have an answer back by the end of April, so in basically 6 weeks. Is that fair and realistic to those organisations? I accept some people may be ahead, but some people are still on the starting block. So how are we going to manage that, Chair, so that we have, a robust and fair piece of feedback, that everyone's had a good chance to give us their best efforts?
Well, speaking for myself in Alresford, as Adrian has said, a lot of the areas, all of the areas have come up before. They're not unknown sites, so 6 weeks doesn't seem to be an unreasonable amount of time to debate these things and to discuss it with the officers.
I agree with you, Chair, but if you have to have a public discussion because you haven't had one, that is the stumbling block here. You could have a discussion with an officer, clearly, but if your parish hasn't been out, and I can think of one that is absolutely littered with New Sheila sites, and they haven't had a public meeting, they may want to do that, and they're going to therefore be hampered. And so you know, a conversation is perfectly reasonable, but if you have to go one step further in the broader consultation with your residents, I'm concerned that we are constraining those groups and therefore looking for what leeway we have beyond April. Well, in fact, beyond the PERDA period, which is the constraining factor, not necessarily the election.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
Chair, if I can answer that, yeah, I think it's as Mr. Fox sort of mentioned earlier. I think if we're getting feedback that there are some issues around that deadline or whatever, then clearly we're going to listen to that and take that very much on board. As I say, we will get a much clearer picture. I think once we've had those initial meetings and conversations with the parishes, which are now virtually all of them have been arranged, we're just waiting for confirmation on a small number of those, then we'll be able to gauge that, Councillor Horrell, as well. And also talking to the ward members, the door is open as well to ward members as well. Like, you know, in other words, if a ward member is concerned about a particular issue and wants to talk to us directly, that is equally fine. And I think the thing is, what we'll do is, it's always difficult. You know, we always have there's always a timetable to a local plan. We have elections most years, and it is quite a significant period that's built into that. We're very keen to continue to push it forward. And I think, therefore, there's always a bit of a balancing act. But as I said, if that proves to be particularly problematic and we're getting feedback from a parish or parishes that say there's a particular issue around whatever, as I said before, if in doubt, the best thing to do is always, you know, is to ask and seek clarity. But equally, if we're finding an issue with that time frame, then we're listening, you know, and we will have to then have a think about that and make sure, because at the end of the day, obviously what we want to do when we go for the Regulation 18 draft local plan and consult, we would really like to be in a position where that's got buy-in and cooperation as best we can from the parishes and other groups. And so by the time you go to consult, you're hoping that whilst there'll always be people that will say you've not got the right site, that's just the nature of planning, as we all know, we've done local plans before, but hopefully we've managed to we've engaged and therefore come up with what people consider to be, the majority of people consider to be, the best solution. But if there's issues around that, we can, you know, we'll have to listen to that, and we'll have to take a view about how the timescale we move it forward in terms of asking them to respond. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you very much, Simon. Right, I see that Councillor Clear has her hand up.
No, Chair. No.
No, she doesn't.
No, she doesn't. No.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Oh, sorry. Right. I think in that case, we've covered the agenda. We've dealt with many questions, had some very useful discussions and comments. So I think we'll close the meeting. Before I do, I'd like to thank you all for attending. And on your behalf, I would like to thank the officers, Simon Finch, Adrian Fox, Toby Ayling and Bethany Stokes, for their very useful comments and their very succinct answers under pressure and so on. And also to Matthew Watson for running the meeting so very well. And on that note, I wish you all a very good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.